one or two fire starters can really make it happen.
Yeah.
And so quick shout out right now to that fire starter, Andrea Lungulescu. Well done on Talent Crunch. What a wonderful event, sponsored by Greenhouse, of course. But yeah, one of the best events I've been to all year. In fact, one of the very few events, Daniel, that there was actually standing room only at the back.
Nice.
Now that is rare in a recruitment event in 2025. Packed house.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, people are coming, people want to see. And it's also more indication that, as much as we want to think of, hey, we're in an online world and it's just, the world is all a small place and everything's on the internet, like location matters, community, local events matter. I was just down in Australia at the ATC conference and having some lunches with customers and prospects. And it's like being in a place matters. And so, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, that in-person conversation, there's stuff that is not recorded, that the off-the-cuff stuff, that is where what I call collective intelligence, right? The intelligence within the community. You tap into that, you combine it with artificial intelligence, and hey, presto, you're the super worker. Okay, cool. Welcome everybody to Brainfood Live on Air, bringing it to you every Friday, no fail. This is being one of the really great mini series that I've been enjoying with Dan in 2025. It's a topic I think close to everyone's heart, but Greenhouse have been one of those companies that have really embraced the challenge of this topic. And I really appreciate you guys coming in and really lending voice to the things we need to talk about. This is an issue, we call it, I guess, job candidate fraud. How do we handle that? How do we protect the employer? But how do we also be fair to the candidates? We have this situation where we need to protect our organizations, of course, but we have to not forget that we need to include as many people at top of pipe, give everyone fair treatment, and to make sure everyone gets a fair shot at this opportunity. And so the topic of today is going to be diversity and inclusion in the era of emerging AI and cybersecurity threats. How do we balance between absolute inclusion on one hand and absolute security on the other? Because those things fundamentally might be in tension. How do we as vendors, as operators, as people in the industry get to a middle point where as many people as protected and given opportunity as possible? Sponsored by Greenhouse, of course. So Dan Chait, wonderful to see you as co-pilot. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself for the few people who don't know you? Who are you? What it is you do? And, what is Greenhouse and who should care about it?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Always glad to be here, Hung. Daniel Chait, I'm the co-founder and CEO at Greenhouse. Greenhouse, a hiring platform used by thousands of companies all over the world to drive a fairer, more inclusive, a more structured hiring process. And whether you're a startup that just hired your first recruiter or a global firm with tens of thousands of employees, you know that competing and winning for talent and being great at hiring is a key driver of business success. Greenhouse is a great tool for you to take a look at. So look, this topic is one that's near and dear to my heart. I would say we started Greenhouse in 2012, so we've been at it almost 14 years. No issue has gotten as hot with our customer base as this, of like, what's happening in my pipeline? I'm feeling overwhelmed with applicants. A lot of them are maybe low intent or low quality. I'm not sure how many of them are real. We might be getting attacked in the middle of all that by bad guys intent on doing harm. And like, how do we navigate all these things in this brave new world of everything being online and remote, AI, everything? It's like super confusing and complicated. And so everyone's interested in it.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And we'll look to dive in deep in terms of what you've done about it, Dan, because I think you've led the way in many respects here. So fantastic stuff. Let's talk about setting the scene just a little bit before we bring our guests on, Dan. The DE&I angle. What do you have? What have you anticipated as being some of the challenges that come from being inclusive and also trying to increase the security for?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. So it starts with what's happening right now in the market, and what we're seeing is this massive explosion of application volumes as it's gotten easier and easier to apply to jobs, partly due to things like stuff Greenhouse has done of making a really easy application form on your website so someone can fill in the form and click it super easy, but also because candidates are using AI tools to magnify their application volumes and auto apply to jobs and auto customize their resumes and application materials to look like the job description. Like, volumes are going up and up, and everyone's application materials are looking more and more alike, right? So recruiters are turning around and saying, like, I don't know what to do. I just had this conversation with a customer this week. I open up a role, I get 1,000 or 1,500 applications in that same day. I shut the posting down. What do? I can't read 1,500 resumes. So they're using whatever they can to try to sift through that and find the small number of folks that they should actually like focus on and review and assess. And how do they do that? Well, what does everyone do these days? They turn to AI and they go like naively, okay, I'm going to have ChatGPT look at all these resumes. Well, there's your first problem because, as we talked about, these tools are going to do whatever these AI tools do. And there's a lot of concern about, are they going to do that fairly, or are they going to be biased? How are they even considering these materials? What is the algorithm going to produce? And there's regulatory concerns and risks in that. And then you get to these issues of like, who am I actually talking to? If I'm a job seeker, I'm worried, is the job posting even real? If I'm an employer, I'm thinking, who's this applicant? Is it the right person? Is it this person they claim to be on the resume? And so customers are looking to figure out, how do they identify these people and not just filter and sort through them, but like once I get to an actual person, who is it? And do I have them show? I mean, I've had customers tell me, we're having applicants like bring their driver's license and hold it up to the camera. Well, okay, now you've got all kinds of issues of like, how are you looking at that ID and where are you storing that PII? And, is that going to bias the process? And then if they're using automated tools, like with Greenhouse Real Talent, people want to know, okay, if we're going to use a system like Clear to verify your identity, is that going to be fair? Is that going to know who I am if my name is different on my driver's license, or if my skin color is a certain tone? And so there's all kinds of questions that come in that just weren't in the process, a few years ago, and have now all of a sudden really come to the front of mind.
This is exactly the thing for the audience here, generally a recruiter audience. We weren't even thinking about this. 2-3 years ago, we weren't even thinking about it. The only like the niche group of people who are recruiting for security cleared people or individuals that have heightened security interests, you might have something in this way. Yeah. But your normal recruiter recruiting for 95, 99% of the roles, this was background checking stuff back in, you deal with that after the fact. No, now is totally different. Now we're asking candidates, just to center on this idea of, flashing the ID on screen for a second seems like a good idea, but it sounds like one of those DIY solutions that obviously unpicks sort of very quickly when you think about what about how you're protecting that person's privacy, where
I'll tell you a story. The first time I heard about these issues was about 2 years ago. A friend of mine called me up. She's the CEO of a tech company, and knows me well, obviously knows I'm interested in hiring stuff. She's like, Dan, I got a story for you. You're not going to believe this. And she proceeds to tell me the story of this candidate they were interviewing for a technical job. And they gave him the first interview and he got all the questions right, but they kind of were like, it was a little bit of a weird interview. But being good, inclusive hiring people, they said, hey, the fact that, his accent was really strong and, he sounded a little odd, like, we're going to ignore that. We're just going to grade him on the answers to the test. He passed the test, move him along to the next step. Same thing happens to the next step, and they get more suspicious, but he keeps passing the test. It's not until the final stage when they're like, okay, we're about to hire this person. Like, we've got real suspicions and we can't ignore anymore. And they literally had him say, like, okay, open your laptop on camera and show me out the window to prove that you're actually in Chicago where you claim to be, and not in North Korea where we pretty much know you are at this point. And it turned out he closed up the laptop and ghosted them and never responded. So they pretty much
disappeared. Yeah.
And I think the interesting, aspect of that is, here you have a presumably attacker exploiting the very thing that we would hope a great HR recruiting team would be doing, which is, focus on the person's answers to the questions and not say things like, well, he was from Asia and had a strong accent, let's be suspicious. Like, that's bad. We've been 20 years telling people not to do those things, and now all of a sudden, attackers are kind of exploiting those dynamics to try to get one over on you, and it's scary. And so, the answer can't be, yeah, let's look more suspiciously at people with accents or from certain parts of the world. But what do you do?
This is it, like ethnic profiling, racial profiling. There's such a risk of this coming in. Sure. And so this is why we're bringing this conversation to the table, because we want to get to a point where, we can get to a best case. So yeah, let's bring on some of our guests here and help us have this conversation. But really interesting story, great anecdote. I've got another one to share with you, Dan. I'll share with the audience as well. There was one scenario where a customer, not a customer because I don't do customers anymore, but basically a contact of mine, they knew this person was highly suspicious based on their kind of impossible background. They work for OpenAI apparently. Before that, they worked for Google DeepMind apparently. Before that, it was Meta Labs or whatever. It was like, okay, this is totally impossible. And
right, that's a small world. Like probably everyone who's done that. Yeah,
correct. Absolutely correct. And didn't have, but was passing through the test. They had an anonymized CV and application process. So that was their policy. I'd use identifying sort of thing.
Again, trying to be inclusive. Yeah.
Trying to be inclusive, and they had to just flow this guy through, similar to your story, Dan, towards the very end, where it was actually getting to face, and thought, okay, we actually have to do the face, even though we definitely can't go there. And it was like, okay, what a waste of time this was, all the way through. And at the same time, that costs opportunity for a genuine candidate that otherwise has been blocked out by this individual. So lots of things we need to go ahead and do.
All right. So okay. You and I are finding all these problems. Well, we happen to have two world-class experts here with us to help us weed through stuff.
Let's bring these guys back on. So Kyle Barry, I've just invited you. I think we've got to invite Torrin Ellis as well. Let's do that. Invite to main stage. Oh, someone's raised their hand. Oh, Kyle's here. There's Kyle, wonderful. Torrance coming on shortly. Kyle, great to see you, sir. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Hey, everyone. I'm Kyle Barry. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Clear, the secure identity company. So basically, we work on providing a platform for people to, verify identities and see how real, hopefully, someone is.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. I'm just going to share Kyle's link into the chat stream there, so make sure you connect with Kyle. We have Torrin Ellis here as well, the legend that is. Torrin, why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
So let me see. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, audio is good.
Yeah, so consultant, speaker, and founder of Noma, a manager intelligence platform. And what I do is try to build high-performing, inclusive, and representative teams.
Yeah, fantastic stuff, guys. Great to have you on the show. Folks, if you have any comments or questions for any of our panelists, do make sure you comment on the chat stream there. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, just throw a comment into the thread and we'll be able to pull those into the conversation here. Kyle, let's come to you first. Clear, do you want to just explain for us, like, what is the product and what's the concept? And then help us understand exactly sort of what you're trying to achieve with the service offering that you have.
Yeah, so if you're in the United States, right, Clear started as like a product in the airport to verify your identity, get through airport security, get to your plane faster, right? And so we spent a lot of time really making that experience solid, being able to verify identities. And we were like, hey, there's only so many airports in the world and we've got this really great system. Can we take it out of the airport, out of like that little kiosk? If you've been to the airport, it's like a little stand, turn it into an SDK, right? Can we embed the secure platform, identity platform that we've created, essentially anywhere you need it, right? Whether it's in your app, your website. And so that's what Clear One is these days, right? We're basically providing a platform for anyone who needs us or wants to use us to verify identities, really verify that someone is who they say they are, a real person, ideally. And so that's what we're working on here at Clear.
Yeah, fantastic. And can you tell us, like, what has been the demand for your services within the recruiting sector? Have you seen change over time on this as things have gone on?
Yeah, I think like there's kind of two parts. Yeah, I mean, two big parts where like it's just been a huge increase in just demand for what we do, right? Verifying someone's real, trying to get a sense of who they are, who they say they are. On the recruiting side, and Daniel was talking about this, right? Like I've got a lot of candidates coming in, I'm swamped with applications for this job. Are these all real people? Are some of them spam? Are some of them like, real people, but like malicious people? I want to have some signal on like who I should focus on first, at least to make sure I'm focusing probably on like the most real candidates. And, I'm not like getting sucked in like a weird security hole or anything on the side. And then the second part, basically post recruiting, right? So I've hired someone, I brought them into my workforce, things change, right? Like, there's people now, you hire one person and a different person shows up. How can I make sure that like the same people I've interviewed and I trust and I like feel confident should be working for me are the people that are still showing up, day after day, 3 months in, 6 months in. And so kind of like the, post recruiting, we're big and like basically, hey, can I verify people in my workforce and just making sure they're still the people they say they are, and that I have that trust of my employees.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Kyle. And Bob, you're quite right. We're going to get to that because I think Dan mentioned it earlier. Like recruitment software over the last 10 years, 15 years is all about reducing friction to apply. But yeah, we now like throwing more friction in. I mean, is that sort of one of the pathways that we're going down? Torrin Ellis, what are the legitimate concerns people have from a diversity and inclusion perspective when it comes down to this increase of a security assessment? This is very prominent actually in the UK, where I think we've recently rolled out like photo ID checks for voting, for instance. And then everyone's realizing, hey, actually a lot of people don't have photo ID in the UK. Because if they don't have a passport and they don't drive, quite likely they don't. And who are those people? They tend to be in populations that are economically sort of struggling, or they're in different parts of society, and yet suddenly they've now got a friction to exercise their vote. And there's a lot of legitimate concern about, hey, we're not being fair to the people who struggle the most. Can you describe for us, Torrin, what are the legitimate concerns that might happen when it comes down to employers starting to increase the requirement for ID and stuff like this in the process?
Yeah, so Dan touched on a few of them, and good morning, good afternoon, gentlemen, and to those that are in the audience. Dan touched on a few in terms of, name maybe not matching because an individual perhaps have gotten married and maybe even been separated or divorced or gone through some other life transition. So that name, that sexual identification, some of those other issues may certainly be there. I want to raise another issue. One of the other issues that I think is extremely important is that we're not necessarily worried about the nefarious actors because, let me say that differently. It's not that we're not worried about the nefarious actors. They have a increased or heightened ability of finding ways to get around the system. What I'm more concerned about is the average individual like myself. As I walk through these application processes, I'm not using any enhanced technology. I'm simply following the rules and doing what necessarily needs to be done. And yet I'm getting caught up in the snare because I'm not able to use some of this enhanced technology and solutions and application. And so that's an absolute concern. Just the average common applicant that's doing the right thing being caught up in the snare, and as Kyle mentioned and Dan mentioned, missing an opportunity, if you will. And then the third thing that I feel is extremely important, and I don't want to make this a political conversation, but we can't ignore policy. And so here in the US, we actually have a president who passed Executive Order 14319, and it specifically talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion being an ideological barrier and an ideological barrier that they don't want considered in AI applications and technologies. And so my fear is that we will have individual founders and organizations that are developing solutions that are going to lean towards the language in that executive order and some of the other executive orders, and then develop solutions that ignore or discount particular communities, if you will. And so that's something that I think is extremely important in our consideration.
Touching on, I mean, again, we don't want to deal in politics, but as you rightly mentioned, Torrin, we have to. The executive order, like, does that have legal weight? In my understanding of it is, it's outlawing anything that is using sort of D&I into as almost like a positive, basically calling it positive discrimination. You can't actually use those protected characteristics, we'd call them in the UK, as part of your decision making process. Therefore, that is now illegal. Is that the state of case in the US, or someone be able to help me out in the comments there?
Well, so what I will say to that, Hung, is one, it is legally binding. And what we have seen already this year is we've seen a number of groups capitulate to the administration. We've seen white glove legal firms, law firms capitulate. We've seen academic institutions sign loyalty pledges. We've seen the AI ethics plan, again, from this administration, which is telling the National Institute of Science and Technology to change their framework around how they consider diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so much so, Hung and others, is to remove the language of DEI from the framework. And so when you think about building and designing technological solutions, again, it may not impact the current state of a greenhouse because Daniel is here, but it could influence an iteration of how greenhouse shows up if greenhouse is doing a significant or sizable portion of business with the federal government. If greenhouse decides that they wanted to vie for contracts and relationship with the federal government, they have people on their team that'll be exploring how Greenhouse's solution is situated, what language it includes, and may very, very much so say, well, no, you can't go after this RFP, or we're going to remove you from a particular contractual relationship because you have considered diversity, equity, inclusion, protected classes, and others in the way that your solution works. So it is absolutely a problem. And yes, it is legal.
I think that's right. And just to build on what Torrin is saying, certainly, everyone is in America and every company is thinking about these pressures and these questions, like what is okay and what used to be, you could say, required is now being forbidden. And by the way, that's different all over the world, and so there's a lot to navigate there, and it does create real issues. We wrote a blog post back in February explaining what we mean when we talk about great hiring and how the ideas that have been embedded in Greenhouse since the beginning of objective, structured hiring is both more inclusive, is both fairer to everyone, and necessarily, and by design, the point of that being to be fair, to be objective, to be focused on the requirements of the job and nothing more. It's not an ideological project. It wasn't an ideological project in 2020 when everybody decided that they were going to say, all these wonderful things, whether they believe them or not. And it's not an ideological project in 2025 when the winds have blown kind of the other way. I think what my advice would be to an employer, regardless of the political climate, is the following. Is most important for you to be able to hire the best person no matter what. And often those people are folks that may not think they should apply to a job at your company, or that your employees may unfairly or inaccurately judge to not be worthy of the role. And your job is to help your team overcome those biases and those problems and give everyone a fair shot to give you a better chance of making great hires. And if you think about it as primarily a strategy for great hiring, as a company, that's important to you no matter what. Now, it's not easy. And I think part of what we're here to talk about today is like, okay, what are those barriers? And we can argue all till we're blue in the face about the acronym DE&I, but at the end of the day is, there's always barriers and problems to being smart about hiring. In today's world of AI and online hiring and deep fakes and all these things, it's getting even harder. So how are we addressing those topics? I think is that's where the tricky part comes in.
Let's drill down on one of those things straight away. I want to talk about photo ID, because I think that is also one of those areas that it's not evenly distributed across any population that has photo ID. I remember this in the know your customer kind of era in banking. It was like, I've got a passport, but there's just a bunch of people that don't. Does that mean they're no longer bankable? So what are the population groups in the US per se that basically lack a photo ID? I mean, is it a particular group of people? Do men have this more than women, for instance? Is there an age demographic we need to think about? Is there ethnic sort of variance in terms of possession of these documents? Kyle, why don't we bring you in on this? How have you guys thought about this? Because obviously, I think everyone wants to include all of the population that's relevant, but we may simply have variance in possession of these identification documents.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think where we are today, right, is like your actual like physical document. It really is like a point in time of that person, right? Photo or not photo, right? It's like I applied, probably went through a process, I got this ID. Just having that physical piece of paper, sometimes, again, there's not even a picture on it. Like that doesn't necessarily say or match who I am today, right? And so when I think about what identity is, like the clear one, what we try to do is, right, like my ID is one part of it. Me getting on a camera and at least saying, hey, I'm a person in the world. Hopefully it's not a deep fake. I'm a real person, right? My phone number, connects probably to maybe an address somewhere in a database, right? It matches my name, right? So I'm a collection of all these different pieces of information about me. And to me, that really what makes a more stable and like real establishment of who I am. There is just so much, and we work with global workforces at Clear, for example, right? We have customers who have employees in the Philippines, India. IDs are like all over in some of those countries, like they're just not consistent, right? And like, some of them do just look like a piece of paper. Some of them are like have written on, right? And so it really is a collection of like, how much can I know about this person to get a sense of like, hey, do I think they're real? And real is a real non-specific word, right? And so like Torin was saying, like names change, faces change, right? Like the photo on my ID might not be who I look like today, it was 5 years ago. And so like IDs are great, but it is a starting point. And like you shouldn't, you can't just say no to someone because like, hey, the ID doesn't look like them. Someone might show up with like their picture cut on an ID and stuff. Yeah, you want to block those. And like, clear one, for example, that's what we look for. Like you're not gonna get through. We want to look for that. But like, hey, if the ID looks pretty real, maybe it doesn't match my face, what else can we figure out about this person to see like, hey, we probably feel like they're a good person or probably a real person at the end of the day.
Okay, so getting to the technical side of it, Kyle, basically one of the first filters of your software is to identify whether it's been an altered document or whether it's a document that is in somehow potentially not what it is. But there is a scenario where you're not necessarily matching a face to a face because you can say that was a point in time. And of course, people's faces change. I mean, unfortunately, that's the case. I mean, look at my photo. That is legit a deep fake. If you look at my LinkedIn right now, that was 13 years or so ago. That's not how I look like today.
Yeah.
So we don't have the technology as of yet to dynamically change and update people's IDs online. How do you go ahead and do that? So you've established that, yes, this is not an altered document. What's the next stage in the flow on that, Kyle?
Yeah, my LinkedIn photo, I have a lot less white beard too, so I get that. That's pretty real. Aside from ID, right? Like I'm applying to a job, or like in some of those other cases I was talking about, like, hey, I'm trying to verify someone who already is at my company. There's so much other data available on top of that ID, right? Like they probably have an address, a phone number, a name. Maybe the name doesn't match, but like the name probably exists in other places. Where are they accessing, Clear from, right? If I'm expecting this person to be in the Philippines and they show up from, I don't know, the Middle East, like, hey, that might be a weird signal. And so it's really putting all these on top of that ID. And then, also there's like more, there's a lot of new stuff coming out too, right? Like there's e-passports, right? Like most passports have RFID chips in it. A lot of phones, you can like tap those on your phone and we can actually like verify that with like the passport issuer, right? So there's a lot of, I think, newer technologies that really do, make it so it's less of a risk that like, hey, I've changed and kind of shifted from, my driver's license at the end of the day that we can use.
Yeah, really interesting. So there's certain sort of trusted sources of data. None of them are absolutely trusted independently,
right?
But when you start adding them together, then you can start figuring out, okay, which are the ones that might have a question mark that require further investigation. And I guess if they start stacking up, then obviously the risk factor goes up. So the name is one, ID is another, maybe the IP is another, perhaps your
phone
address,
number, house address.
phone number.
Yeah. And I think like what's important, I think someone mentioned in one of the comments too, like adding friction, right? Like, when I think about like how people use Clear, like how I recommend people who are looking for more piece of identity, right? Like it isn't a silver bullet, right? And you don't want to just put like another AI model that's rejecting candidates. But what I want is to understand, at least have like some signal and like be able to dig into like, hey, this person was verified. Here's some of the information about that, and have the ability to, apply my own kind of process, my own level of risk to those people. Because again, yeah, like, the last thing we want people to do is there's just another thing knocking people out of a process, a verification flow. And like, that's not good for anybody. That really hurts, the people coming through whatever process that's involved in.
Yeah, very, very good. Let's talk about candidate experience. Do candidates have to accept more friction in process? Dan, I know this is triggering for you, but I want to get your honest opinion. I want everyone's honest opinion on this. But we take the airport example. There was once upon a time, I believe you could actually board a plane without a passport. There was once upon a time, there was no ID checks and you could just walk on and do it. But today, everyone would accept that would be insane to allow people to go on a plane without a passport check. So we've kind of accepted that friction. Are we at the point now with the rise of these deep fakes that actually we as candidates also have to accept, you know what, it's going to be requiring just a little bit more because everyone is safer by doing this? Let's have everyone commentate on this. What are everyone's thoughts? Open sort of question to people who want to contribute to this one.
Yeah, Dan, if you don't mind, let me jump in really quickly. I'll be brief. Hung, I want to go back to your original question to Kyle. And when you asked, are there any communities or groups that don't necessarily have ID? And as I thought about that, I don't believe that there are. If there is one, it might be either in the disability community or of a particular age, when you've stopped driving and doing certain things around your particular locale, you might sort of find yourself without having state issued ID. Those might be the only communities that I can think about here in the US. Certainly, I'm open to other comments in the audience, if you will. But to your point around the friction being a part of the process, I believe that we are there. What I'm hoping is that organizations use a high degree of discretion in the sense of where they apply the friction and how much of that friction is applied. So, for instance, global entry, there are people who hesitate on the biometric application. They don't want their eyes to be scanned. They don't necessarily want their fingerprint, if you will, to be used to enter into and out of a particular country. And so there are alternative methods for those individuals to transition between borders, if you will. And I believe the same thing needs to apply as we are deploying these technologies. If there are people that find themselves absent of identification, then how are we as humans providing them with alternative methods to still be able to verify their identity? And again, this is going to be in that larger audience that I mentioned in the beginning. It's not the individuals that are applying the AI solutions and other technologies. It's just the average individual. That average individual who, may show up at a job interview and their license is expired. They didn't necessarily know their license was expired. How do we get that individual? It might be that college student who hasn't started driving or has a reservation around driving, and all they have is their academic institution ID. What are we doing to make sure that we can keep people in the process legitimately and not nefariously or erroneously excluding them from the process? But my response is we're at that point where the friction needs to be receptive. But I think we owe it to candidates and others why this friction is involved in the process. And as long as we can communicate the why behind it, I believe people will be a bit more receptive.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, didn't mean to jump on. But first of all, I'm always going to say yes and enthusiasm whenever Torrin speaks. So just to be clear, but look, since we've gotten involved in this topic really deeply, we've heard concerns about identity verification and IDs and driver's license and passports and these things from all corners. It's not an issue that just applies to one type of person. You can, just think about this conversation. We have people who are deeply invested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, who are thinking about how are these technologies going to affect underrepresented people, transgender people, immigrants, people with darker skin tones, like all kinds of questions. And people in the security community who are saying things like you just said, Hung, I don't want my retina scanned. I don't want my fingerprints on file. I don't want my ID on camera. Like, those may not be the same groups of people, but they all have questions. And so I would say both. There are, opportunities for us to make these processes simpler, to explain them better, to be more transparent about how they work and when they're used. Absolutely, to help address some of those questions, and a requirement on the part of employers using these technologies to provide an alternate pathway. Because there are just going to be a meaningful percentage of people, just like at the airport, who for whatever reason don't want to do these things. And there's people at my local corner who pay cash at the bodega, because they don't want their, credit card on file. And like, that's just part of society these days. There's people who pay cash because they don't have a credit card or they can't get access to one. And there's people who want to opt out of the system. So I just think anyone dealing with kind of the general public needs to realize that, like, you shouldn't make too many assumptions about why someone may opt out or not participate in an ID process, even as it may be something that makes the process sort of smoother for kind of the 80% of people who don't feel that way. You got to recognize that there's a large percentage of people who do feel that way or who aren't able to do those things. And so what's the alternate path? Is it, hey, let's get on the phone and talk about, things, or come on for an in-person meeting before we hire you? There's always another way to do it and to accommodate those individuals. And so, I think it's important to listen to those concerns and to think about them, both so that you can make the experience better for everyone, and so that you can figure out what else is needed in order to get, everyone through the process, in a way that works for them.
Just a quick, sorry, just to interrupt Kyle, a quick double click on those two things. We're starting to surface up some really important points, which I want people to basically make note of. Number one, the provision of alternative sort of ways to do it. So if you've got a unified, okay, here's the single door to go through, guess what? You're going to inherently be non-including people unfairly. Because there may be legitimate reasons that people kind of go through. Even just looking at the chat, I actually can't believe what Dan just put in there. That your parents don't have fingerprints. I mean, we might have to segue a little bit and talk about that. Like, I didn't realize that was possible. Is that genetically the case? I mean, was that?
I mean, it's a big world out there, man. Like, you can't believe the variety of humanity. But yeah, it's true. Yeah, that somewhere in their 70s, their fingerprints faded away and they don't have them.
That's crazy. Well, there you go. It's a classic example where, you can't be dependent on one door. You have to have multiple doors. So for folks like Kyle and his sort of service offering, that's got to be baked in process, isn't it? Baked in product.
But listen, as fun, I mean, that's kind of a fun fact, but like the broader point, if you're thinking about how do we treat people in a hiring process, you can generalize that, say, well, not everyone has a first name and a last name, right? Not everyone has the same words on their driver's license as on their resume. Not everyone has the same gender that they were born with. Like, there's all kinds of ways in which human variety, and all its wonders show up in the hiring process. Like, you just got to deal with it. I mean, you got to recognize that it's a big world out there, and accommodate these things.
Yeah, and it is a difficult challenge. I mean, I think we talked about this in a previous episode, but worth segueing it a little bit about name change. That's one of the things that actually happens more regularly than we think. It's very normal for names to change, as a matter of fact, or it's very normal for people to have names that they go by that aren't what they were born and allocated. And so when you're trying to verify ID, I mean, I'm going to cite myself as an example here. I actually can't verify my ID on LinkedIn because the name on my passport is not the name I go by. And they insist on the passport name, right, to verify the ID. Now, obviously, it's not a huge problem for me, but I just wonder, what, would I be deranked as a candidate because I'm not verified? Probably. If I'm posting stuff online and what have you, is my reach going to be declined because there's a little bit of a risk signal that this guy may not be the real person or whatever? Probably. So we're getting to the point where, it does impact people in a really substantive way, because we've got this like one way to verify someone's identity. So provision of alternatives, number one. Number two, should I say? And number three is communication. Explain to the people why you're asking for these things. You need to just describe the scenario. You can talk about the increased cybersecurity threat. I think that's all good, but explain it clearly why you need it. And then probably even more importantly, number four, like, what are you going to do with the information afterward? So I wonder whether anybody, maybe Kyle, you could take the lead on this. Like, what's the best policy for dealing with the information once you've collected it, verified or not? Like, what happens with the information you've collected?
Yeah, I just want to go back real quick to like having alternatives. And I think that is like super crucial to, you know, adding any extra identity verification to a process like recruiting, right? Like, we basically, any customer that we work with at Clear, like one of the first things we talk to them about is like, hey, what do you do when someone says no, right? Or I don't want to use Clear. We have to help them basically make kind of the alternative process, right? And that looks a little different based on like, hey, what does the customer want, and like, you know, how do the people coming through their integration work? But if you don't have that, right, like you're going to be missing out in significant, you know, fairness to people coming through wherever you are trying to do that verification. So I think that's like 100% crucial today. And then from like a data perspective, yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's funny too, because like we actually see a lot of difference in our customers on what they want to do with that data, right? And so, you know, sometimes it's, you know, and I think it kind of depends on like your level of, you know, I guess, trust in your own security systems, and maybe the level of like information you want around your workforce or your candidates. You know, we have customers who use Clear, for example. They like call to our API, they get like some of the signals that we found for them. They like look at it at like that point in time, they throw it away, right? They're like, hey, I just wanted to know like what happened there. And maybe they'll just be like a true false on their side. You know, they don't want to be in the business of like having all that data, and, you know, both from like a data security risk, but also from like, hey, maybe someone at the company might use it, you know, to go against like maybe some equity and inclusion principles, right? Maybe they're like trying to, I don't know, run some weird data analysis on it, right? And you just don't want that. You know, at the end of the day, we do have customers too who want to like save some of that data, you know, and like they kind of maybe want to see, is there differences in maybe some of the roles and just like the types of candidates? You know, maybe there is like a role that's like is a target for maybe just like more fake or synthetic candidates. And customers want to see that. So, you know, I honestly, like, maybe the bad answer is like there's not a good answer, but I think it really kind of comes up to you as a company. You know, where do I want to go? I think there is some benefit in like both, right? Because if I throw it away, you know, if something does go wrong for a candidate, right, it is hard to like say, oh, hey, this, you know, this system made a mistake. I can't go back and be like, oh yeah, we messed up on, you know, verifying you through the recruiting process. And that's really tough, right? And if you do save it, right, you have that kind of fallback. You know, maybe someone reached out and like they got rejected, and they found another way to talk to you. You can like go back and be like, hey, you know, we made a mistake here, and that's also really powerful to have that ability with those tools.
Yeah, really, really good. Where should we put the ID verification in the recruiting process? Previously, this was right at the back end, right? This is post offer. Yes, we'll go and check it around. We'll call around a few people. Maybe we'll do basic understanding of what it is. But that would be where it is. I think it needs to move up the front end, but does it deploy right at the front? Or is it midway? Like, when is the best time to put it in? And do we, you know, any thoughts on this? Do we subject all job applicants to it, or is it like second interview? Like, or when do we put in this thing optimally? Would you say? Let's go around. I want everyone to give a thought on this. Dan, let's go with you first. Do you have a strong opinion? It's okay not to have an opinion on this one, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in talking to customers, they're very different in how they, you know, I mean, we deal with thousands of companies. And so some of them are persistently subject to constant attack by North Korean, you know, state actors. And they have a highly regulated environment where any, you know, leak in that firewall is a real problem for them. And so, you know, for them, they really need to know, is the person I'm interviewing the same person who applied? Is the person who I'm, you know, screening later on the same person that did the last interview? Is the person I'm sending an offer to the same person that I interviewed, all throughout? And so they're doing often multiple ID checks throughout the process for many of these type of jobs. By the same token, even within that same company, you know, they may say, hey, this is the process for, you know, our security hires, our remote IT worker hires. But if I'm hiring, you know, a marketing, you know, manager, maybe it's less important. And all I need to do is, at one point along the way, do a check so that I'm sure that I'm talking to the person that I thought I've been, all along. So it does vary depending on kind of your risk tolerance or your risk profile, just because some companies and even some jobs are much more sensitive or subject to these type of problems.
Yeah, so it may be per company and it may even be per job within that company, right? Like there's obviously different levels of security requirement in different jobs. We all kind of intuitively understand
And
that. CFO,
other
you've got to have
customers
to
I've
know.
talked and other customers I've talked to have said we're actually fully in person. All of our interviews happen in person. All of our work happens in person. We don't have this problem. We don't want to do any of this. We want people to apply on our website, and we're going to bring them in person to meet. If they're not the person that they said they were, we'll find out when they show up at the door. So again, like there's a wide spectrum here. I don't want to. There's, in my experience, not a one size fits all.
I agree 1000%. And, diversity and inclusion has always been around the business methodology. It's always been around the relevancy of data as well as opportunity costs. And so when I think about some of the conversation around the deluge of applicants, well, we've always had a deluge of applicants. I mean, that's always been present. Maybe it's 5% more now, 10% greater now, but we've always had the situation where there's been a deluge. And so I think when you look at the data and you look at the cost, what's it cost to use one of these solutions? It may be, fractions of a penny, if you will, fractions of a nickel, but there is a cost. And so you got to decide, do we place it up front because these opportunities here are high risk and, critical to the organization, or do we move it somewhere towards the back because these are of less importance, if you will, in terms of threat to the organization, threat to the business, threat to the marketplace. So I do believe, like Daniel says, it really, really depends on the organization as well as the specific opportunity.
And maybe also on brand as well, right? Like I can imagine a more famous brand might attract more nefarious actors. Like if you're a no-name organization plugging away, doing great, whatever, but you're not maybe like well known as a B2C product, maybe you're just simply harder to identify as a target. So yeah, increasingly it looks like you've got to just think about where you're at as a business and what each of your roles, what the risk profile is, and then think about whether you need to apply the tooling and where. Kyle, I've got to ask you, as the security expert, and you got to balance the experience, the cost, and the security. Where would you place ideally the ID verification aspect?
Yeah, I mean, Daniel and Torn are right. It's a blend of the company I'm at, the sensitivity of the job, what is it going to do? What's going to have access to? Am I remote? Am I in person? So I don't know if I can say it better than they did. I think the one thing I would add is post hiring, right? When they show up for the job, most companies, like the people that are doing the hiring, aren't always connected to the people who deal with employees after the hiring process, right? And that's where there's a lot of potential for, again, someone who shows up now after the hiring is a different person, right? The real person shows up, but like, hey, they're actually having someone connect to their computer and do the work, right? And so I think the second spot where like the call, because they are hired, they're in your workforce, they're accessing your systems, and a couple of cents I think is really worth that value, especially when they're now in your workforce, on your systems, with your data, with your customers, to have like another checkpoint right there.
Yeah. And by the way, we talk about sort of, a foreign state actors and so on. But there's also like commercial reasons to do some of this stuff. I mean, in our industry, wasn't there a very recent case where there was a commercial espionage scenario where, one guy was like converted into some sort of spy for a competitor or something, and they were like pulling out sort of. I didn't want to mention names, but there was a kind of a very famous case, I think, still ongoing. And it was a crazy story. I mean, that tells you what it means. There's a lot of money at stake. So when that is there, then incentives are obviously going to be pulled one way or the other. Dan, I think you wanted to say something? No?
No, I was just nodding and
okay. No worries.
Like,
no worries.
Everywhere you look like, oh, right. We forgot, like after you hire the person, they still might not be the same person. So you have to, and it's just like, that again, that just didn't used to be a thing, but now we've all heard stories of people doing these, job stacking. There was that guy in Silicon Valley who had taken 39 jobs and was, farming them out to other people to do the actual work. Like, it's hard to know where you're sort of, you can take for granted things that you used to just assume.
There is a few things that are emerging though, aren't they? So number one, I think remote does increase the risk scenario significantly.
Definitely.
So I think all of us are pro remote for lots of good reasons, but we have to accept that when someone is
including the DE&I, right?
A huge aspect of, and this is one of the big challenges of our situation, is that remote is much better for people that are primary caregivers, for instance. It's much better for people that don't have a vehicle to get to the work and all this type of stuff. Pro remote is generally a default position. However, it does increase the risk scenario, and that's where you need to have some mitigation factors. Number two, the vulnerability of the company and the per job, that's all very specific. So you've got to have that analysis internally to see where you're getting that stuff coming at you. Software company that's remote, that's operating in a high profile or highly sensitive sort of area, clearly that has a different sort of risk profile to someone who's selling bagels on a stand somewhere. Those things have got to be very clear on. And when you are implementing these solutions, you've got to also be very clear that number one, communicate why you're doing it. Number two, provide alternative avenues of access for people who can't go your primary route. And number three, don't rely on a single bit of information as the determining factor. You've got to triangulate with as much information as possible. I guess the fourth point I want to just mention is that people can DIY it, probably already are DIYing it, but this is where you're going to run into all kinds of crazy problems that's going to cause you probably some legal risk going down the track.
Well, when you say DIY it, Hung, what give maybe an example or just double click on that.
Yeah, so they're trying to reduce security, reduce their risk profile. So they're doing stuff like, example Dan mentioned earlier, like where you flash a job on and off, like you're trying to control the amount of people coming in. So you publish your job, you take it down 24 hours. You know what's going to happen there is there's clearly a D&I problem there. Like what there's going to be, you're making an arbitrary decision to take the top people who are the first people who applied, rather than analyzing all of the quality of the people that have come through. Or second example, again, Dan mentioned asking people to flash an ID to camera. Like you've not got the setup to actually securitize that data. Like what are you even exposing other people to? That's a lawsuit down the track. I'm pretty certain. So basically you don't want to try and do a do-it-yourself solution, because if you think you're at risk, you've got to go more pro. I guess that's my position on it. Folks, I've just recognized the time. We are flying through this. If you have any questions for Dan, Kyle, or Torrin, now is the time to simply ask them either in comments or on the comment thread. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, we'll pull them through to the chat and get to them. But whilst we still have our wonderful guests here, let's just go with some recommendations that each of us might have, addressing the audience of employers that care about diversity inclusion, but are also very conscious of the risk that they have. How do they play this? What's the one thing you'd recommend they do? Dan, go to you first.
Well, look, it's great to listen to advice and good sounding words from folks like me. But I would my argument would be don't take our word for it. You should expect a level of transparency from vendors and partners that you're working with. They should be able to show you an anti-bias audit that they've done very recently. And as they iterate and improve on technology, they should be able to update those and show you, improve, bring the receipts, as they say, as the kids say these days, that they've tested their tools and technology against a broad set of data to prove that it's not creating additional bias.
So I want to jump in, to Dan's point. We did a report earlier this year, reducing bias in HR using artificial intelligence. Hung, you actually were kind enough to have me on back in January to talk about the report, but the report is still relevant. And to Dan's point, there should be some degree of transparency that an organization is able to provide in terms of how did they get to the solution that they are deploying, and what are they using to recalibrate their solution based on customer and client feedback. And I just want to absolutely say, while Greenhouse may not be the only entity that is addressing this issue, they are being very thoughtful in how they are addressing this issue. And I appreciate the partnership between Greenhouse and Clear and what is being explored in terms of how they are bringing such to the marketplace. Will they get it 100% right? Maybe not, but they have been thoughtful, and we can go back and explain how we got to where we are. And I think that is extremely important. I just feel like, you know, when we look at some of these solutions, Hung, to your point of DIYing it, you know, when you are just sitting in a coffee shop, scratching something down on the back of a napkin and bringing it to life just because you have the technical acumen and aptitude, that's not necessarily the best way for us to approach a solution like this. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness that Greenhouse and Clear are placing into the solution that will soon be introduced to the market.
Yeah, really, really good, Torrent. And just to underline this, Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that part of the kind of advisory committee that you have on security in the Greenhouse product actually includes DE&I kind of professionals, right? So you're combining diversity and inclusion professionals along with cybersecurity professionals in the same team, in the same room, in the same communication channel in order to build this product.
Yeah, and it may be a unique body in the world of experts being brought together, but yeah, it's been really helpful to have that conversation with experts who spend their day thinking about candidate experience, thinking about inclusive hiring, thinking about security, because those are all areas where, you know, often there's intuitive, you know, obvious seeming ways of doing things that are wrong, right? For every sufficiently complicated problem, there's an answer that's simple, obvious, and wrong. And I think a lot of these type of things with preventing fraud and securing your hiring fall into that category. So yeah, we're super grateful to have this you know, advisory board and just approaching it with humility that, you know, you need those expert voices if you're gonna get it right. And to Torrent's point, you know, we may not get it 100% right. We're processing tens of millions of job applications every month. But, you know, I think in a world where generally hiring has been incredibly biased for a very, very long time, I think we can make significant improvements over the status quo and just keep trying to get better and provide transparency. And that's really the goal more than anything.
Yeah, fantastic. Kyle, final word to you. Any advice you have to employers out there that are thinking, you know what, we've got to balance these two things. We've got to balance inclusion with security. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it's true that it's easier than ever to recruit, to show up as a candidate and go through a recruiting process, right, and generate an ID. That's real, right? And so you do need to definitely increase how you understand who is a real candidate. A real candidate isn't just an ID. It isn't just a phone number. We talked about that, right? That's the second thing. So the third thing is, if you are using a company like Clear or another vendor, or just thinking about how you can kind of focus on this problem, anyone who says it's like, you know, they'll give you an AI model and say yes or no on a candidate, like, you don't want that, right? You want to be able to have a very clear way to investigate how a decision was made with whatever you're using, if you do it yourself too, on like how you're verifying these candidates. And that's what makes that process really fair for everyone. And so that's like the most important part when you're doing this.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. Learned a lot. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been a really educational session. In 1 hour, I think I've massively increased sort of my awareness on both angles of this super important topic. So thank you very much for your contributions, guys. I'm going to let you go. So Dan Chait, thank you so much for joining us and being co-pilot on this series. It's been wonderful sharing the seats with you. Torrent Ellis, wonderful to see you, sir. And then, you know, banging haircut, I might say publicly now. Love it, my friend. And Kyle Barry, great to have your contribution. Really, really interesting to see from that CISO point of view. Okay, folks, that's about it. I hope everyone's enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week as ever. So if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you follow the channel. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, follow my page on there. We go live every week and have conversations of this type. That's a bit about it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Peace.